And tonight we have our guest speaker is Mike Robbins, who's a PowerShell MVP. The first time I met him was at the summit in 2014, I believe. That's held up at Microsoft, and last year was in North Carolina. But anyway, he was a speaker there, did a great job there. So I think this evening you're talking about going from one-liners to advanced script modules, right, Mike? Right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, then, with that, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike, and then he'll let you know how he wants to handle the rest of it. So I'll leave it to Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's attending tonight. And my session is going to be very informal. So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and stop me. I would rather cover your questions while I'm talking about that particular topic. The user group meetings, you know, like I said, they're much more informal than like a professional presentation. So we've just got a few PowerPoint slides, and then we'll jump. It's all demo. So as Tom said, I'm Mike F. Robbins. Well, I go by Mike F. Robbins online, and you can find my blog at mikefrobbins.com. But anyway, I'm a Microsoft MVP on Windows PowerShell, Sapien Technologies MVP, leader and co-founder of the Mississippi PowerShell User Group, co-author of Windows PowerShell TFM 4th edition, author of Chapter 6 in the PowerShell Deep Dives book, and winner of the Advanced category from the 2013 Scripting Games. Okay, so the content we're going to cover tonight, and I've actually got some ad hoc stuff. I've been a little under the weather this past week, so I'm better now, but if I have to cough or something, I'll mute. And if I happen not to mute, I apologize in advance, but at least I'm not there to spread my germs in person. So I'm going to live a little dangerous and try to type in the demo after taking some drugs for this. Okay, so we're going to talk about readability, we'll talk about naming, we'll talk about parameters, commandment binding, we'll talk about parameter validation. It's going to be a high-level overview on all these, but if you want me to talk more, more in detail about any of these, I will. We'll talk about verbose output, pipeline input, error handling, comment-based help, and support should process. And with all these things we're going to be talking about, it doesn't matter if you're doing like your day-to-day job, if you're writing functions, even if you're writing scripts. A lot of this can be done with advanced scripts as well. But if you're doing like DSC, all DSC is, it's functions is what it is under the hood. So this is great information to understand. And the better code that you write, your co-workers and the people that, if you ever change jobs, that come behind you will really thank you for writing better code. So now it's time for the demo.
So, Mike, not to interrupt too much, has everybody here had the opportunity to write a function yet? No, not yet? Okay. Just kind of getting the gauge for you, Mike. So, have about 50-50, I think. Some have and some haven't.
Okay.
Audience is like.
I've got a little bit of canned content here, but like I said, I am going to jump in and just write one by hand. And one thing I would recommend is, you don't have to memorize everything in PowerShell. If you can't remember the syntax for like a function, what I typically do, because there's some things I don't use very often. So I'll actually open a new tab and I'll hit Control-J and I'll select this commandlet, the advanced function complete, and I'll press enter, and it'll give me the syntax for an advanced function. It gives me the help syntax, and I actually write mine a little bit differently than this. I actually take the help and I'll place it just inside the function, and actually it would be inside this curly brace. And typically I put my curly braces on the same line as the function declaration. So there's a few different styles there, but this kind of gives you like if you want to say that a parameter is mandatory. And this here is using the version 2 syntax because you don't have to use equal true if you specify mandatory. with version 3 plus, then that's you would be writing it and it wouldn't be version 2 compatible. So anyway, keep that in mind that there's default snippets, and Control J is the hotkey for that in the ISE. And this is on any machine that's got PowerShell. I know these are in there on PowerShell 3 and higher. So don't think you have to memorize everything with PowerShell. Okay, so let me ask you guys, since I'm not in the room, is the font large enough for you?
Yes. Yeah, that's good, Mike.
Okay. And if you're working in the ISE, as you saw, I'm sure that probably most of you guys are familiar with the ISE, but you can make it full screen when you're writing code, and then you can get your script pane back so you can see the output. So the machines that these are actually all virtual machines, and I actually have one more that I spun up today. It's called Web01. So I'll show you the version of PowerShell we're working with. So we actually have PowerShell version 4 on all the servers. They're running 2012 R2. We have a domain controller, SQL server, and a web server. The SQL server and the domain controller run in server core, so there's no graphical user interface on those. The web server, I think, has a GUI or maybe the minimum GUI interface. The PC has Windows 10 Enterprise Edition, and of course PowerShell version 5 ships with it. And based on the build numbers, I think this is the RTM version, not the version 1511. But what I'm getting at with this is there's nothing special about this environment. It's probably very similar to what you're running even in your production environment. So I've got a lot of comments in here, and what I'll do, I'll actually provide, I'll post a blog article with all my information as far as the scripts and everything that we talk about here. And I'm recording this as well, the session. So when it comes to naming, you want your functions that you write to feel and look like the default built-in commandlets. So when you run something, you're running get process, is one of the real basic. So if I ran get process PowerShell, so you want your commandlets to look and feel just like the built-in ones, so when you provide them to somebody else, that they know how to interact with them. They can almost guess what the command is. So, and what you want to do, you want to use an approved verb, because when you create a module out of your function, what's going to happen, it's going to give you a nasty error message that you're using unapproved verbs if you don't. So what I'm going to go ahead and import the SQL PS module, and that'll take just a second. That's installed with the SQL client utilities, but this is the message I'm talking about, and this is because the SQL Server team, the Microsoft SQL Server team, had a couple of commandlets prior to it being a module. It was a snap-in. When they moved it to a module, they didn't change the verbs, so they have one, I think it's encode and decode are not approved verbs in that module. And if I would have specified verbose when I imported it, then we could have seen the exact functions. Well, actually, those are commandlets just because they're compiled. But you want your functions to look and feel just like the native commandlets, and you don't want your users to get these nasty error messages. Okay, so if you run get verb, and I'm going to output this to out grid view to give you a better view, and I actually sorted it by verb. Now with PowerShell version 5 in out grid view, you can use Control plus, so you don't need zoom it anymore to make this larger. But you'll see, and you can see what group they're part of. So like checkpoint is generally associated with data, so if you're writing some SQL commandlets, maybe that's a verb you would use. Now any of these are valid, you can use them any way you want, but it gives you an idea of what, there's probably some in here that are from security as well. Yeah, here's one, protect. So these are the verbs you want to use, and a lot of times you may have to move what you think is the verb to the noun portion, and it'll be get something. And this will become more self-explanatory as we move through this. Now, believe it or not, and if you've used PowerShell for very long, you'll know that there's no get version to find out what version of PowerShell you're running. So a very basic function, you know, I can run this command here and find out what version of PowerShell I'm running. Okay, well, if I just want to turn that into the simplest function ever, I can just wrap that inside the function declaration, define the name of the function, and run it. And what that does, if I went out here, and we all know that directory is an alias for get child items, so I'm just going to type that since it's easier. Well, we'll take one step back from there. We'll run get ps drive. Well, there's a function ps drive. So what you can do is do a directory on your function ps drive and see all your functions. Well, we'll narrow this down. Let's look at the get version function that So you can see that it's on the function ps drive now, so it's loaded into memory in my current session. Now when I close this session, that function's going to go away. So if I ran get version, now it's going to give me the same thing that the command that I enclosed in this would give me. And I could actually deliver that as part of a module so that somebody wouldn't necessarily have to dot source a PS1 file. And by dot sourcing, I want to show you what I mean. So a lot of times you'll see people, they'll create a function, and I want to keep this function here very simple because I don't want this to seem more complicated than it really is. So if I save this and I have a demo folder, and we'll call it getVersion.ps1. So what'll happen a lot of times is you'll see people, if I'm running get version from here, then it doesn't return anything. And this is because the script actually ran, but it ran in the script scope. And when the script exited, it basically got rid of the script scope. So you have to dot source it. So if I ran dir on my function ps drive from this is a separate PowerShell session. This is the console. And I said get version, it wouldn't return anything. So what you have to do if you don't place this in a module is you have to dot source. And what dot sourcing is, you put a period and a space and then the path to the PS1 file. So it could be, it's in the current directory. I could also specify the fully qualified path instead. So now if I run that and I run the dir again, notice it's loaded into memory. But the problem is to deliver this to a coworker and explain to somebody who may not be real PowerShell savvy how to dot source these is not, this is more for testing really. But now if I ran get version, then I get the same thing. So that gives you an idea. I didn't really understand what dot sourcing was when I started out with PowerShell, but it basically loads the function into the global scope instead of the script scope. Okay, so one of the things I recommend, there's a pretty good chance that somebody else out there is going to write another function called get version. And sooner or later, the PowerShell team may include a function called get version. So I don't really want to have a name conflict with my command and their command. So I could say get ps version to make it specific to PowerShell, and then it would do the same thing. But what I typically do is I typically prefix my commands with MR, and it looks like Mr. because of the case I put it in, but those are my initials, Mike Robbins. So I'll run this command, and it's very, if you've worked with like getAD user and getAD computer, it's the same sort of thing, you know, to prefix your commands. And what I would say is, at your company, come up with a standard and stick to it. So you're probably going to have something that's specific to your company. So I'll go ahead and run this, and it's the same thing. The only thing I've done at this point is to rename it. Now, all of those functions, of course, are loaded into the PS drive like I've already shown. So I could say get star version, and that'll return all three of them. Now, the other problem with dot sourcing these, and I'll jump back to this. So we only have one out there. Well, if I want to get rid of this get version commandlet out of my current session, I either have to close PowerShell, or what I have to do is actually remove it with remove item. I basically delete it. So now if I do a dir, then it's gone. So I've deleted it out of my session without closing out of PowerShell. Okay, and I think I've already, and so you can actually pipe it to remove item. So I've covered most of that. So let's talk a little bit about parameters. So with parameters, and I think what I want to do at this point, I want to jump out to another, I actually want to write a function here, because this will show you what you've either done in the past or what you're going to do if you haven't gotten to this point with your PowerShell. So you'll write a command, and I'll just use get WMI object for simplicity. And let's say I want to get some information from a computer. That's a normal task. So we'll query the WMI class Win32 operating system. And if I ran this command, it gives me a little basic information, but as we probably all are aware, there's a lot more behind the scenes. So there's a lot of information here. Well, if I looked through all that information, I kind of want to filter this to left, so I'm only retrieving exactly the information I need. And what I want is caption, which is going to give me the operating system version in plain English, and the computer system name. So if I ran this command, you'll notice it still returned other things, and even if I pipe this to format list star, it's going to return other things, but most of these are actually going to be empty. So that's not really important for this session. The only thing I want to return are those two items. And all this will make sense here in a second. So I want those two items, which is going to give me the computer system name and the operating system version. Also want the serial number. So we'll write the same sort of command, and it's found in a Win32 BIOS. The property we want is serial number. Okay, so now if we run one of these, it runs fine. If we run the other one, it runs fine. It's running against the local computer. But the problem is when we run both these, it really only shows one. But it's because we're trying to like jam two commands in the pipeline. So we want to run this against different computers. So let's say DC01. So now I've got a command that I can run against a remote machine. And let's say we want to turn this into a script. So we're going to create a variable called computer name, and we'll store the computer name in that variable. And instead of hard coding this computer name at this point, we'll use the variable instead. So it keeps us, maybe we've got a 500-line script here, you know, we don't want to put computer name on all these different lines. So what we can do now is run this and we get the same results. So you could turn this over to your one of your junior level engineers or somebody who is not PowerShell savvy, and you could ask them to modify the script every time they want to run this and open it up and run it, but that's not very efficient. And it really doesn't take a whole lot more work to turn this into a real reusable tool. So the first thing we want to do is we'll create a PS custom object. If I could spell PS custom object. And one thing I will tell you also, even though you can copy and paste from like a snippet or even start with a snippet, is take the time to type things in, because you may think initially that, yeah, I'll never be able to type that in, but if you do it a few times, you'll learn that it'll become second nature. So we want to return the computer name, and the reason that we're pulling the computer name from the computer, because maybe we give it a CNAME alias in DNS, or maybe we gave it an IP address. But even though we gave it something to query, we want it to return the actual computer name. So what we're going to do here, we're actually going to store these in variables. So we'll call this OS for operating system, and we'll call this BIOS. So the computer name is going to be OS, and it's OS dot caption. No, it's actually OS CS name. And then we want the operating system, and these are going to be properties it's going to return. And take it from experience that you don't want to put spaces in your property names, because then if you're ever going to filter on them or something like that, then you can do it, but it's more hassle on your end. Okay, so, and then we want the serial number. And you could have all sorts of stuff like processor, memory, and disk space, and whatever, you know. Okay, so now what we should be able to do is just run this, and at least we have both commands combined into one pipeline now. Well, to turn this into a function, we can just go to the top and say function, and we'll call this get Mr. System Info. We need a curly brace at the bottom to close it up. Notice I put a little space in the end to make it more readable. I'll tab this out, so that makes it much more readable. And it also helps to, I can see that my function begins here, and it actually ends here. And then my PS custom object begins here, and it ends, I line up my curly braces for the beginning and ending. So if you've got 500 line script or function, you can tell what curly brace you're missing if you've got a problem.
Mike, and the return is going to be that custom object, right?
That's exactly right. Okay, so this is still kind of static because it's got a static computer name in it. So what we want to do, we'll just create a parameter block to start with. So we'll put this in a parameter block. Okay, so if we run this now, and actually we're going to change this. If somebody doesn't specify the computer name, we want it to run against the local computer. And there is actually an environment variable for that. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead and run this. So now if we run get Mr. System Info and don't specify a computer name, you'll notice the computer name is PC01, which is the computer I'm on. But notice if I specify a computer name, it doesn't return for PC01, it returns for DC01. Well, I've only really designed this for one computer name at this point. So if I try to return two computer names, it returns a collection or an array, which is not what we want. Now also, if we run get command on our get, and I'll go ahead and put the full name so you can see it. So if I run get command on get Mr. System Info, and I look at the syntax for it, you'll notice that it's only got one property, or it's got one parameter, excuse me. And I really want to limit that, at least at this point, to a single computer name. So the way I can do that is to define my variable as a string. So now if I run this and I try to go back and run it with two computer names, it says It says, if you read the error message, it'll say that it can't convert two items to a string because it's an array. So what if I want to turn this tool, querying one computer, that's not very powerful. So if I want to allow multiple computer names, I can put another set of square brackets but after string, and that tells it to accept an array of strings. Well, then we have to handle those array of strings. So we'll iterate through a for each loop. And this is actually the for each scripting construct. So we could call this anything we wanted to. We'll call it computer. So for each computer and computer name, it's going to run whatever is inside this. And we want to run all this. I will tab that in as well, because the formatting of your code, trust me, you'll go back 6 months later if you haven't touched this. And if you don't format it properly, you'll say, man, who wrote that garbage? And then after a while you say, oh yeah, I wrote that. So anyway, so now what we need to do, instead of computer name when we're running get WMI object, we want to specify computer, because that's what it's going to iterate through. So we'll go ahead and run this. I believe that's correct. So we'll run that command again. Well, guess what? Now we can query multiple computers. Okay, well the problem though is, I could specify a null, and that's not going to work too well. So I want to make sure that somebody specifies a value. So what I can do, I can actually I can use parameter validation and validate not null or empty. And as I said before, you can go, I think I must have closed it, but you can actually go here and do your Control J and pull up the snippet. And you could say, see here it is here, it's parameter, and then it's, well actually it's not that one. Oh, here it is. So it's this line. So I could copy and paste that just as easy. But if you copy and paste forever, you'll never be able to type this in. You basically end up memorizing it, and sometimes by typing it in I will make a mistake, but that's all part of it. So now let's see what happens when I try to give it a null. So now see it stops it immediately, and that's what you want. If valid input is not provided for one of your functions, you don't want it to run halfway through the function before it fails, because you may be doing something like deleting files, and it's kind of like with SQL Server, you want to run the complete transaction or you want to run none of it. You don't want half a transaction to work. If you go to an ATM, you don't want money to be taken out of your account unless the ATM spits the money out. So now let's say maybe we want to accept input from the pipeline. We want to be able to pipe the output from another command to this command. So the way we do that is, and I think I'll specify it above the validate not null or empty. You could specify this below as well. But you say parameter, open and close parentheses, and another square bracket. And inside those parentheses, you value from pipeline, I believe. And just to make sure that's right, typically what I'll do, I have multiple monitors. So a lot of times if I can't remember, I'll pull up another copy of the ISC and I'll have my snippet open, and then I'll type it on the other screen. And that's how I learn all these commands. So value from pipeline. When you specify value from pipeline, this is going to be by type. So when a string comes through, it's going to try to bind it to computer name. Now, if we actually specified value from pipeline by property name, that would be by property name. So if we had an object come through that had the name of computer name, and actually it's this one here, then it would try to bind that even if it wasn't a string. And that's one of the reasons sometimes you'll see people use alias. I can alias this property name. I can say, and I'll show you in the snippet here. I'm sure they've done some aliases. Here it is. So they specified P1 as an alias. And what I could specify like server name, host, and so on. And one of the main reasons for doing that is if I'm going to bind from the pipeline, value from pipeline by property name, if another commandlet is outputting something called host or server name, then I can actually pick that up with the alias. But what you want to do, you actually want to, all the other commandlets, if I jump back over here, and I've gotten way ahead of all this. Let's see. Yeah, so this is actually where I am right now. So if I run this function, and I run the command, and what I'm doing, I'm actually searching for commands. You'll notice there's 42 commands that I currently have loaded in my PowerShell session that have a computer name parameter name. You have 2 that have computer, none have server name, host, or machine. So when you hand this off to a junior level engineer or somebody else at your company uses it, they're going to be expecting from you using other commandlets for your function to use computer name. And if it doesn't, then it's going to take more time for them to get up to speed on it. And ultimately, your commandlet, your function, is going to be non-standardized. And that's one of the, you're kind of defeating the purpose of PowerShell is because it's really big on standardization with having verb-noun and so on. So anyway, back to, we were trying to accept values from the pipeline. So you can have a begin block, a process block, and an end block. Begin block is actually, for this scenario, we're only going to have a process block. The process block runs once for each item you send through the pipeline. The begin block is not required, but it runs once before anything comes through the pipeline. So if we're accepting computer name from the pipeline and we have a begin block and it would be defined like this, then it would not actually output the computer name. So if I did write output, the computer name is computer name. So we're actually going to get that when we run this command. It's going to say the computer name is, and it's going to be blank because that occurs before anything comes through the pipeline. And that's a very important concept because I've spent hours looking at functions in the past before I learned that. So we want all this code here to run once for every command that comes through via the pipeline. So, and then we're formatting this. If you format your code and you have trouble, and especially if you're asking questions online, if you posted this online, it's a higher probability that somebody's actually going to be able to help you if they can read your code. So now, I think all this is correct. So if I run this, what we'll do, we'll go back and run this command. It appears to work properly. So now what we'll do is we'll send these through the pipeline. And notice it works properly through the pipeline. And we actually, actually it did, it looks like, at least with this, and I don't know if something's changed with PowerShell version 5, but it did tell us what our computer name was, which is surprising to me. But you'll notice we only got one of them. It got the last one that came through the pipeline. So, but typically
Hey,
with
Mike?
this, yeah,
Mike?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. You were just breaking up just a little bit. I didn't know if you realized it or not.
Okay, no, I didn't realize it on my end. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can now. You just broke up there for a little bit, so you might want to just go back over like, I don't know, a minute and a half before what you were talking about.
Oh, okay. What I was talking about is with the begin process and end block. The begin block, and I was noticing some different behavior here, but the begin block typically occurs before anything comes through the pipeline. Now with this command, I really don't, and you would do preparation there, like you would do whatever commands you want to do for everything. And it's kind of like if you needed to import some file or something like that, or if you needed to load a module, there's better ways to load the module, but you could do it there. Or sometimes I'll load the SQL module there because I don't want to see the message about it having the unapproved verbs. But what I want to occur in this command is I want what's in the process block is going to run one time for everything that comes through the pipeline. And then you could have an end block down here at the bottom, and that would be for cleanup. So if you had something that you needed to, maybe you've opened SQL Server with the .NET framework and you need to close your connection, otherwise it's going to cause a memory leak. So those are the sort of things that you would do in the end block. But the process block is what we'll need in this scenario. And what we can do, if I run get AD user, well actually computer is what I want, and I specify filter, and I want to say name like, and what we want is I think all my machines that are on are end in 01. So if I query these computers, and I can see that name is what I want, so if I say select expand name, that'll give me the name. So I can pull the computers from AD. Maybe I've got 100 computers. I can actually then pipe those to get master system info. So I can get my information. I can pipe the output of one command to the other command. And that's really the power of being able to accept pipeline input, is taking the results of one command and sending them to the next command to get more information about the results of the first one. Okay, so you also want to add help. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to jump back over to my canned script, and I want to make sure I've covered everything that I wanted to cover so far. So one thing I want you to see, I don't think I've added this yet. See, I haven't turned this into an advanced function. And what I ran earlier, and I may just type it back in if it's not my, yeah, this is it. So you'll notice I still only have, well, actually it does say I have common parameters. I think once you start adding the parameter attribute, it actually kind of turns commandlet binding on. But it's best to add commandlet binding, which turns your standard function into an advanced function. And we're not going to save this. So what that allows you to do is to add verbose output. Now you'll see a lot of people, they may put a comment in here and they say getting information from computer. Well, guess what? Unless somebody opens that script, they're never going to see that. So a better option is, don't get me wrong, you may need that in there, but specify it with write verbose, which will give you verbose output. So getting information from computer. So we can now run this. So if we run this just like we ran it before, then we don't get the verbose output. If we specify the verbose parameter, notice we get the verbose output. And this runs differently based on if it's from the pipeline or with parameter input. Because you can actually run this command, if you didn't have pipeline input, you can run it this way. And let's specify our verbose parameter. So it actually ran very similar, or actually the same as what it ran before. It's probably because of where I put the verbose statement at. But that gives you an idea how you can put messages in your functions, and you can turn them on without having to modify your code. And somebody may actually read this, because if you've got a 500-line function, which I don't recommend anyway, I prefer to break my functions down into smaller functions, even if you have one function call another function. And when you're doing like unit testing and stuff like that, and even troubleshooting, it's going to be much easier to read your code. Okay. So, and I've talked about commandlet binding. Now, support should process is something that a lot of people, they don't really understand what it does. Now, if you notice...
Hey, Mike. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Just to help you out, can you re-explain commandlet binding? Because you came in really broken during that, and we only heard about it.
Oh, commandlet binding?
Yeah, just re-explain it one more time.
Sure. Commandlet binding is what turns your a standard function into an advanced function. And I've got a little simple example here that I'll show you. So if I run this command, it's test Mr. parameter. So now if I'm typing that out and I press the minus, notice I only have computer name as an option. Well, the only thing I've added now is commandlet binding. This is the only difference in this command. So now if I run this command and then notice I've got verbose, I've got debug, I've got error action, I've got all these other common parameters. So that's what commandlet binding does. It makes a function into, it turns it into an advanced function. So who knew that this little simple line had all that power? Now, one thing is, once you start defining like this parameter attribute, even if you forget to add commandlet binding, it will add all of those, it's implied more or less. But I recommend still to go ahead and specify that. Okay, so you also notice if I look at the syntax of that command, notice that I have common parameters. And if I went back and looked at the version without the commandlet binding, so now if I look at the syntax, you'll notice I don't have the common parameters. And I've got a few things here. You can actually look at the help for the commandlet attribute. That's one thing I tell people, you know, there are some great PowerShell books out there, but most of the books are the Cliff Notes version of the help. I mean, PowerShell's got all the information you'll ever need built right into the help. So I've got each section that this goes through, it's got the help topics for that if you want to know more details. So what support should process does, you really should only add this to commands that make changes. And think of it this way, if your PowerShell commandlet is going to potentially create a resume generating event, something you might lose your job over, then you definitely want support should process. And I'll show you what that adds. So now you'll notice when I'm tab expanding or using IntelliSense that now I have what if and I have confirm. And I'll show you that in another view as well. So you'll see now I have what if and confirm. Now if the commandlets you're using inside, and we'll add it, this is actually a scenario where I'm going to copy and paste that. So let's copy this. And let's paste it inside our commandment binding here. Normally this is not a command that you would need this for, but for the purposes of this demonstration we'll add it. So if I specified what if, and you'll notice, so these commands, I wonder if they natively, see they don't support what if. So you would actually have to add logic inside your commands. But if the commandlets inside your function already support confirm and what if, then your job is done by adding that. But just because you add support should process and you have the what if and confirm parameters does not mean that they will work. And I have a good example here. So this actually starts functions that are set to start automatically, are not delayed auto start services, and those commands should be running. So, and I'm going to do no to all because I have some commands in here that I ran is at the bottom. So if I run this with what if on DC01, so it tells me what it would do. It would start a service. And then also with confirm, it tells me, hey, are you sure you want to do this? And I can say yes or no. If I said yes, then guess what? It's going to start the service. You know what? What if's not going to return anything this time because all the services that met the requirements now have been started. So that's what support should process does. Parameter validation, I've covered that a little bit. There's all sorts of parameter validation. I think I've got a couple more things I do want to cover. Let's see. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to use an enumeration, which this is. So I'm going to use an enumeration to validate console colors. So if I run this command, what it's going to do, it's going to output all the console colors. So maybe I'm going to specify blue and dark blue. Well, it returns those, no problem. Well, guess what? Pink is not part of that enumeration. So if I try to specify pink, it's going to stop immediately and say, nope, can't use pink. And to get the enumerations, there's actually a get type function that Warren Frame, who goes by the Cookie Monster on Twitter, he has written, and I have a link in this code to where you can download that from. Okay, now validating IP addresses. I've seen people write 50 lines or 100 lines of code to validate IPv4 and v6 addresses. There's a type accelerator. This is all the code you would ever need to validate an IP address. So if I run this function, I specify a valid address, guess what? No problem. I specify 256, which is not valid, it stops it immediately. You see how simple that command is. Not only does it validate IPv4 addresses, but it validates IPv6 addresses. So if I specify a valid IPv6 address with the same command, then hey, it says yes, it's valid. It even tells you if it's a local link, if it's a site local, if it's a multicast, and so on, just the way that I'm returning it. So if I specify an IPv6 address that is not valid, then it'll stop it as well. That way your command is not attempting to process. If you want to get a list of all the type accelerators, you can run this command here. So this gives you all the type accelerators that you can validate against. Now if you have the PowerShell Communities extensions installed, it's a little simpler command to run return a list of those. Briefly covered verbose output, and the same thing here that I was going to show that I already showed previously. Let's see, pipeline input. just looking to see if there's anything in here that I didn't. Oh, error handling. We've got to cover this. So what I use for error handling, and there's a few different ways to handle errors, but try catch, and it's actually try catch finally, but you have to have try and you have to have either catch or finally, but you'll typically see it's try and catch, because finally will run even if whether there's an error or not. So try catch handles terminating errors. That's the key to this. So if you don't generate a terminating error, then your catch block will never run. So I want to demonstrate this, and this will be a little easier to explain once I get into the demonstration here. So if I run this command I just ran, which I don't have any error handling in, against DC01, that's a valid computer. Well, does not exist is not a valid computer on this network. So it's going to run, it's going to time out, and guess what? I actually got an unhandled exception. So this is an error that's not handled, but it still continued and gave me the output for DC01 since I specified it second. Well, I want a better error message for my users. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my command inside try catch. You'll notice this is where the magic happens. It tries whatever. So wherever you're anticipating errors, you want to place that code inside a try block. And then when that code generates, if a terminating error occurs, it'll run what's in the catch block. But there's a problem with this. The problem with this is that it's going to do the same thing, because since it ran all the way and continued to DC01, I know that it wasn't a terminating error. So what I need to do, I actually need to specify error action stop. Now there is a error action preference variable, but that changes the error action for your entire PowerShell session. You want to specify this on a command by command basis, so that way it doesn't affect other commands. Now if you're running something like from the .NET framework, then you don't have an error action preference variable or parameter for that command, which you wouldn't, then what you can do is set the preference variable to stop, and immediately after the command that you run, then you'll set it back to whatever it was and continue as the default. So now you'll notice this time when I run this command, just make sure I did run it. So if I run the same command this time, you'll notice I handled the error, and I gave a warning actually instead of an error. So it tells me that computer name it cannot connect to that computer, and you could actually output that to a log file or whatever. And maybe you want to go back and retry it again later. Maybe maybe it's a PC that you're querying and the PC's turned off. So the key to error handling is remembering that try-catch only handles terminating errors, and you can specify error action stop to turn a non-terminating error into a terminating one. Do we have any questions at this point?
Is there a validation for MAC addresses by any chance?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let's see.
Yeah.
That would be nice, though.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
I'm thinking that there's not, but I've never looked. So I'm just thinking about how Macs, a certain portion of it is per vendor. What you could do is possibly, if you found a list of them on the internet, you might even, I'm not sure. You could write your own function if you wanted to perform the validation, but that kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
But, and that's what I'll tell you what I'll do is in the blog article I write, I'll bring that up. And if there's a way to do it, I'll put that in there.
Hey, Mike, there's a question I have. There's functions, and then there's this other type of function called a filter. Have you used it very much?
Yeah, filters are really not used anymore. I've written about filters on my blog site. I had a contest a while back, and I was hoping that somebody would write a filter for it. And I wrote the solution as a filter. But filters were, I think they even existed in PowerShell 1, and they were supposed to be like a lightweight way of, you don't have to code all the pipeline input stuff, and you can get pipeline input without much overhead. But I almost never see anybody using a filter anymore. And I know I read some things that Bruce Payette had posted on some forums, and he said that those were kind of deprecated. Was the that wasn't word for word what he said, but that's kind of the thought I got from it.
Okay.
But yeah, if you want to kind of show off to somebody and something that even somebody that's PowerShell savvy has done, or show them something they haven't done, then you could show them a filter, Okay, so
I hadn't seen much about them. That's the reason I asked.
Yeah, and that's the reason nobody uses them. They're more or less deprecated. So comment-based help. Help is one of the last things on this, but it's very important. You want your help to look and feel just like the real commandlets. So if I run this, if I have this get Mr. auto stop service, and they're like, I have no idea how to use this command, then they can actually, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll actually send it to show window. Because also with show window in PowerShell 5, you can use the control plus and make it larger. So you can see that they can see the synopsis, they can see the examples, and so on. They can learn how to use this command, and they can also see that it sets a string for input. So don't forget about writing your help, and also like if you're posting it somewhere, you can post links to who wrote it and so on. And then we've already talked about snippets. Let's see. I've got some additional resources in here. What do I want to do at this point? A few things to, when you're writing functions and your modules and so on, is you want to put them in some type of source control system. Because I don't know about you guys, but maybe you end up with code here and you end up with code there, and maybe this machine dies and you can't figure out what the latest version is and so on. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to get a hold of some old code and then figure out, oh yeah, this one's got that problem that I actually already fixed, but I ended up with an old copy of the code, So what I've been using is Git, G-I-T, which is an open source version control system. But it works really well. So if I look, I've only got one function in here, and that's fine. I'll tell you what, we'll just delete this. I wonder if I can. Some of the DOS commands I've really never run. So looks like that did get rid of it, yeah. So I have a repository on my server, and my server here in this scenario is DC01, and I want to collaborate with some of my coworkers on developing a new version of my Mr. SQL PowerShell module. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to clone that repository. So I'm going to say git clone and DC01 git, and I think with those slashes it's going to generate an error message, but we'll try it. And we'll tell it quiet. Yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm going to pull this down, and then we're going to fix a couple bugs with this, and then we're going to put it back in source control. So now if I did a directory here, you can see I've got a Mr. SQL module. So if I change into there, you can see I'm in my master branch, and notice my PowerShell. I'm running the. Let me make sure I tell you right. So if I run get module, I think it's called PoshGit. Yeah, that's it. And this is something kind of new that I'm doing. So I'm certainly not an expert at it, but it's something that I think is very beneficial for everybody. So if I actually take a look, I've got multiple functions in here, and what I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, I'll just leave those open. But there's a function called psedit, and this is part of PowerShell. This is not part of Git, but I can actually open up all the files in this directory with psedit. So you notice all the tabs that just opened. So what happens is I'm creating a PS1 file for every function, and then inside my script module, which is a PSM1 file, I'm actually iterating through the PS1 files and dot sourcing those. And then inside my module manifest, I have all the functions listed. Well, I've discovered a better way of doing this. It's a little more dynamic than having to do all this stuff manually. You know, every time you have a function, you have to put the name of it in here. So what I can do, so export module member is another way to export those. And you can specify the function. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to store the results of this getChild item into a variable, but I'm also going to pass it through the pipeline at the same time. And I believe that the out variable is new to PowerShell 4. Could have been in 3, but I think it's 4. So if I call this functions, and let's call it PS1 files. We'll make it. Yeah. So now down here, and when you're specifying the out variable, you actually don't use a $sign in front of it. But when you're calling it, you would specify it. So I think base name is what we're going to want. So we're going to save this. I'm going to modify my module manifest. One of the reasons I'm showing you this, I want to show you a function that's, or a module that's a little more advanced. So we don't even need to export our functions in our module manifest at this point. So what I should be able to do is import the module, and I'll just, it's not in my PS module path, so we'll specify the path to the module manifest, which is a PSD1 file. And a module manifest is basically metadata about your module. And typically you'll see people, they'll put all their functions inside their script module. Well, the problem is when you start using source control and you have multiple people working even on different functions, then you'll end up with a lot of merge conflicts, which is one of the reasons I've kind of moved to putting them in separate PS1 files. So let's go ahead and import this module. And so now there's actually a problem with one of the commands in this module, but we'll run get command and we'll specify a module and we'll specify Mr. SQL. So those are a list of all the functions in this module. So they're loaded dynamically, and what I'm going to show you, I want to show you the number of commands in this. So I've got 9 commands total in this module. So we wrote a command and we didn't save it, so it's right here. So what I can do, okay, I've just wrote a new function, and let's just say I want to add it to that module. So the only thing I have to do is say File, Save As. we'll just call it the PS1 file what the function name is, because it's going to be the only function in there. And then that way, if I publish this on like GitHub or somewhere, if somebody only wanted that one function, then they can just grab it. Or I can grab somebody else's function and add it to my module without having to grab a bunch of code that I care nothing about. Or somebody could contribute to one of the functions. So I'll save this. Now what I want you to notice is I can import this again, and I'll specify force to make it overwrite. So now when I do a count, well, guess what? I've got 10. So it's that easy. I didn't have to change my module manifest. I didn't have to change my script module. All I did was simply drop my PS1 file into the folder and re-import the module, and I've got another function available. So now if I show you the actual commands, you'll notice now we've got this get Mr. SQL or get Mr. System Info command as part of that module. So to me that's like really cool, you know. So, but you'll notice that I actually put that in master, and that's not really what I wanted to do. So I'm going to do get reset, and actually I won't need to do that because I haven't committed those changes yet. So if I did get status, so what happens if we do get checkout master? Let's, at this point, because I do want those changes, but let's do this. Let's so what happens if I run get branch dev? So I should have those changes, and I want to run get checkout dev. Yeah, and I actually researched this error today, and what they said is get actually sends a lot of things to standard error instead of standard out. And the recommendation when you're switching was to use the -Q for quiet, just to make it be quiet, you know. But I'll go back and check out my dev branch. And what I want to do is one of these, there's a problem with one of these commands that I discovered. So if I ran import Mr. SQL module, so this will import the SQL module. It looks like it was already imported, but if I run get Mr. SQL database info, and actually I don't want the PS1 file, I want the function, and the computer name is going to be SQL01. So you notice I just returned information about all my SQL Server databases on that SQL server. Now the problem with that command a super secure password. The problem is it's going to put my backups from the default instance in the root of the C drive instead of the default location. So if I ran the same command again, and I said backup Mr. SQL database, if I ran this, and I guess I do need to specify a computer name. And see, that's the thing about having a mandatory parameter. If you don't specify it at the command line, when you call it, then it's going to prompt you for it. And see, it's set to accept an array of strings for the computer name, which is why it prompted for a second computer name. So now if I go back and look, see I've got like an AdventureWorks 2012 or 2014 and so on, and master model and MSDB and Northwind and pubs. It's throwing all those in the root. So the problem with that command, and we'll find it real quick. So this backup command is it sets the instance name to default if you don't specify it. Well, when it gets down here and it actually queries the registry on that server, and it queries it for the instance name, but in the registry the default is MS-SQL server. So what needs to happen is if instance is equal to default, or if somebody specifies it as Microsoft SQL Server, I can just stick this in here. So it needs to be MS SQL Server. I'm just going to save that. I'm going to re-import this command. Actually, import. So if and you could unload it, or you can actually run it with a force parameter, and it's just easier to run it with force. So if I run this again this time, and instead of being prompted for the computer name, we're going to specify it, so SQL 01. So now when we back up those databases, and we go look at it, I don't have anything floating around in my C drive on my SQL server. It actually queried the registry to find out where the default location is for the backups for that instance. And if I drill down into the default location for this server, if I look at backup, it actually created folders for all of those. So that's where it should be. So you'd be surprised what one little line, what difference it can make. So let's see. And I won't get too much into Get. The main thing I wanted to because this session's not about that, the main thing I wanted you to be aware of is you can actually manage this stuff right inside PowerShell with Get Posh. And I've set my, I can see I've got some changes. So what I could do, I could actually run Get Status, and I can see what the status of those commands are. That I've got one untracked file and I've got a modified file. So let's say those are really two different changes. I don't want to commit them together. I want to have them in separate commits. So I can run git add, and I want to add Mr. So I'll add that one. So now I can see my prompt changed again. So I've actually got staged and unstaged changes. So the staged changes, some people call that, I put it in the index. So the next time I perform a commit, what's in the index is going to get committed to the database. So I can run git commit and give it a message here. Now if you don't specify that, it's going to open up a text editor for you to type it in. But so what we did, we added system info function via PS1 file. So we can actually commit that. So now we've only got one change. So if I run git status again, you can see I've got one change. So and that's a modified file, so I don't necessarily have to add it in a separate command. I can actually run git commit, and I can specify A to add it, and M for the message. So changed. Well, what we did, we actually changed instance variable to MS SQL server for default instance. That looks good. I help if I could spell. Okay, so all our changes are in our database now. So like if I did if I look at the files that are in here, they're going to be different. If I go back and do a git checkout master, and I get that one command again. So now I'm on the master branch. So what I should be able to do is do a git merge, and I can merge those dev changes in the master. And if I run git status, I can actually see my branch is 2 ahead than the server, so I can push these changes up to the server if I wanted to. So that way they would be backed up. But the thing I like about Git, you have the entire repository on your machine, and even if you're on an airplane somewhere, you can be working. The network can be down, in other words, where a lot of centralized source control systems, you can't do that. So, and basically, like GitHub and all the different ones, they're based on Git. Now, the other thing, too, you guys might be interested in is there's a preview version of the ISE out. So if it only runs on, I believe, Windows. Well, it's going to have PowerShell 5, so it runs on Windows 10 or anything with the PowerShell version 5 preview. But if I run find module, which is part of the PowerShell Git module that ships with PowerShell 5, name, and it's PowerShell ISE preview. Hopefully I've got internet access on this VM. I do. So what I can do, I can actually run install module, and we'll specify force because it's an untrusted repository. So it's just that easy to install it. Should pull it down here. So now if I'll jump over here, ISEP is the alias for it. So if I run that, the cool thing is you'll notice I still have my other IC in the background, so it doesn't interfere with if you're doing mission critical work, it doesn't interfere with the default ISE. But you can get the latest breaking changes, and I don't think there's really they've mainly done bug fixes at this point, but my guess is they're going to start shipping the ISE like this in the future, so that way, kind of like they did with help, you don't have to wait until a new version of the WMF, the Windows Management Framework, comes out, of a new version of PowerShell to get a new ISE or some enhancements. So is there anything else you guys would like me to cover?
I have a question, Mike.
Sure.
I have need to take input that I have from a function where I record what's going on both to the screen, to a variable, and then send an email. So I need to be able to take the output, because I'm doing continuous integration. I need to take the log results, log it to a file, so if I got to troubleshoot it later, I have it, and also send an email with what took place during the script execution, so that I can send it to support staff. So what I've done initially is I created an environment variable, and I took the output of what I have in my function and sent it to an environment variable. But what I found was that I'd overrun that environment variable with too much logging at times, so I have to figure out what I'm going to do in lieu of that. So I was looking for some advice on how you would do it. So
yeah, what I would do, I would use t-object.
Okay.
Because
so how does one go about? Let's say you have this function that's doing some activity, and you want to record what's going on through verbose or what have you that's going on during the function, and then you want to pass it back to your main block, so that you can take that whole set of log results and send it as an email when you're going from function to function. Like if I have like 5 different functions and each one of them writes something, and I want that return result of what happened during that function sent to an email, if you will, and to a log. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, you are. Let me see. Now, if you notice, with this, and this is a really...
What I do to answer your question is I append to that log, so every time I run, I can see every time I've run, so I use that same log. Well, I had thought of doing a temp file. Use the temp file until I'm done, and then shove the results in that log file. And then I just hadn't implemented it.
Yeah, what you could do is, and I'm showing a real simple example on the screen. You could run something. I'm just doing like get process PowerShell to get some simple short data, and you could pipe it to TObject, which allow you to put it out to a file, and you can append to it. And then, depending on how you want the email message, you could have it in a function to run send mail message. But if you want incrementals to get to you via email, then you could actually pipe this to send mail message. Because basically what this does, like if I run it again, so it's going to run it again. And if you had it in a function, then what I could do if I wanted the entire log, I could do a get content on that file. And you'll notice now there should be 2 entries in this file. So let's clear the screen and then get the content of that. See, now I got 2 entries. And then when it ran again, it would have 3, and I would have 3 entries. But I would manipulate this with TObject, because TObject, it's a fork, basically. You can fork your output to more than one place. And you can also, you don't have to put it to a file if you don't want to. You could put it to a variable as well. But there's almost no reason to do it to a variable, because what I could do is, let me go back.
To give you an idea of what I'm doing, I actually wrote a script to take things in and out of SCOM and put it in maintenance mode. You're familiar with what I'm talking about. And one of the guys here works with me at Multi. What I do is I run through that, and I do the whole operation. And then at the tail end of the script, I send the email, which contains the full log results of everything that was a success or a failure, or whether it was able to take it in or take it out, all that kind of stuff. So that it's like an after the script run log results, and that's what gets sent in email, so that you don't get an email storm of like, I don't know, if I'm doing 5 servers, you would get like 10 emails for 5 servers.
Yeah. I think what I would do, I would actually, I mean, if you wanted it in a variable and you want it in a file and you wanted the output on the screen, then you could run something like this. So, you know, it's on the screen, it's in the log, and only the current one is in a variable called results. But based on what you're telling me, I would run something simple. I would run the process like this, because I'm guessing that you might need the output of the first command to run the second command, but you could keep sending it to TObject to append to the log file, and then at the end you would simply you would run send. It's very similar to what you're doing now. So we do send mail message, and the body would be this, but the only problem is it's got to be a string, so you would do out string and so on, you know.
Yeah,
that's probably really close to what you're doing now, though.
Yeah, except for the thing I had a problem with is I chose to put what I'm doing in terms of the logging, into a module. And I import that module, and then I couldn't figure out how to pass or how to get a return result out of a module and fill it in my variable from the calling function. That's what I was having problems with. So I chose to use an environment variable as a stopgap until I could figure out a better way to do it. I can show you what I'm talking about offline, Mike, if you want.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I actually wrote the one that I'm using. I put on GitHub under my ID. It's called Get something log. I forget exactly what I call it. PS log, or I forget. I can send it to you later.
Yeah, send me a link to it.
Okay.
So I've got a few resources on the screen now. There's a free ebook on PowerShell Advanced Functions that me and I think there was 6 of us PowerShell MVPs that took part in that. I wrote the part on parameter validation. Another great resource is blogs. If you go out to my blog, I've actually got a blog roll, and I keep that up to date. Like I dropped somebody off of it, I believe it was earlier in the week, because they haven't blogged since July, and I'm like, hey, if you're not blogging on a regular basis, and if it's not good content, then I'm not going to be promoting your blog. So if you want to know my recommended blogs, just see my blog roll. And then user groups are a great source. I mean, you're at a user group tonight, and speaking of user groups, next Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, it'll be 7:30 p.m. your guys' time, is the Mississippi PowerShell user group, and we've actually got a guy from England who's going to be speaking for us, who's a SharePoint guy, but he's going to be talking on Git. He's going to be talking on several different things, not just Git. That was the thing I was interested in. But he's going to be talking about Pester, and I'll put a link in there to that. Then PowerShell.org. If you've got any questions that I didn't cover here or you think about later, the forums on there. There's people I get emails every time somebody puts something on there, and it's almost like a contest. And you also get different different ideas from different people instead of just one person. PowerShell Magazine is another great resource. The Hey Scripting Guy blog, and PowerShell Magazine, Hey Scripting Guy blog, and PowerShell.org. I've written some guest blog articles there. The Microsoft Virtual Academy, they've got some good resources also. So there's a link to my user group, so you can sign up for it, and it's online, so you can sit at home and watch some PowerShell. The only thing on this slide is that's a paid-for resource is Pluralsight, and I don't work for Pluralsight. They do sponsor my user group, but they really do have some good videos. And last but not least, this is my contact info. You've got my blog there. An easy way to remember my blog, you can go, it's kind of like my modules and commandlets and so on. I prefix them with Mr. So you can go to mrpowershell.com, and it's an alias to get to my blog. Twitter, I'm a big believer in personal branding, so I have the same brand on my blog, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. My email address, if you want that, go out to my About page. I have a riddle that you'll have to solve with PowerShell, and it'll let you decrypt my email address. And then also the user group, we have an alias for it, so if you go to mspowershell.com, like Miss PowerShell, so just remember Miss and MrPowerShell.com, and that'll get you there. And then those are a couple of the images of the books that I've taken part in. And I wanted to thank you guys for your time, and see if we have any final questions.
Mike, I wanted to offer one compliment. I used your advanced functions almost every day for the last 4 or 5 months. I use them as a reference, so great blog article. Thanks for putting it together in a PDF. That was awesome, dude. So I use them as reference all the time. So
you're welcome. That's why they're there. And a lot of times I blog a lot. You probably know that. But sometimes I get burnt out and I get tired, and occasionally I'll get an email from somebody or something, or something like you mentioning this, and it's enough to keep me doing it and keep me motivated, to know that somebody got benefit from it.
Well, quiet crowd except for me, Mike. I don't know if we're going to be able to actually webcast the next one or not, Mike, but we'll have the scripting guy and his wife and Jason Helmick here for the next session, which we'll have in downtown Tempe. As I expect a reasonably large crowd, I would expect. And I hope soon that I'll be able to put up a site to get things rolling again, since it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to use AZ Talk. So I'll stand up something else.
Sure. That at this point, that's probably the best idea, and that sounds like a great session that you guys have planned for next month.
Yeah, if I'm able to, my audio-visual guy here in the back usually does a real good job of helping me out with getting things recorded and helping me out with setup and whatnot. Between him and I, hopefully we can get it rolling so we can actually get a broadcast on the web. If I'm able to, I'll make sure I'll let you know about it if you wish to attend, Mike, or you can send it on to others as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to attend it. And if you do make it available online, and I'll help you promote it as well.
Okay, that's awesome.
Okay, well, you guys have a great night. I enjoyed presenting this session, and I appreciate all your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Good night.